Competition Act 2002, which deals with competition. So competition as a general English term implies a rivalry. In economics and business, competition implies economic rivalry between the market players, economic rivalry between the market players. And in an economy, the market players are those who plays a role in the economic system. Economic system. The term economic system means the whole complex of mechanism dealing with production of goods and services, distribution thereof, and consumption of the commodities. Economic system is a whole complex of mechanism that deals with the production, distribution of the produce and consumption of production. So there are market players in this process, and there will be manufacturers or producers in case of goods. In case of services, the service providers. So producers or manufacturers in case of goods, and service providers in case of services. So production of goods. Now, in the value addition chain, after the production is completed, particularly of goods, the goods are channelized into distribution channel. So there are what is called distributors, dealers, wholesalers, retailers. In e-commerce and online transactions, there can be some intermediaries catering the production to reach the consumers in an economy might be missing. So it can be direct sale from the manufacturer through the dealer to the consumer. There may not be the showroom or the shop or the retailer. So economic system and these many players generally found. So all these are the traders and the merchants. Traders, merchants. right? So economic rivalry between the market players dealing in the same, that is identical, same or identical goods or services, or dealing in similar goods or services, right? So production of garments, automobiles, furnitures, services, say airlines, courier, beauty services, education services. So competition exists between the market players, right? So consumer goods, for example, fast moving consumer goods, say shops, detergents, toothpaste, toothbrush, we find number of manufacturers and marketers, say Hindustan Unilever, Colgate Palmolive. Nowadays, indigenous brands like Dabur, Patanjali, Himalaya, all are dealing in the same types of goods, and therefore naturally there will be rivalry to promote or pursue. Why rivalry? Rivalry to pursue its business objectives, which increasing the sales, increasing the bottom line, that is the profit margin, and becoming market leader are typical business purposes which the market players seeks to achieve, right? That is the very nature of the business. Increasing the sales, thereby increasing the profit margin, and becoming the big player, dominating player in market. So there must exist economic rivalry called competition, right? So we have tried to understand simple understanding of competition, and this is how the World Bank has explained competition. That is the market situation, right? Market situation in which the firms belonging to industry, firm means, the term firm means a business entity, and the business entity could be producer or the distributor, right? So the firm in industry, example, industry, automobile industry, say passenger car industry. And the market player includes Maruti Suzuki, Hyundai, Ford, Tata, and various other domestic as well as multinational companies. Right? Then the distributors of these companies. Industry is automobile and firm will be Maruti, Hyundai, and so on. That's the word firm used in economy. Right? Now, World Bank has put that these firms operating in a particular industry, these firms operating in a particular industry, right, they strive for buyers' patronage. Buyers. The actual or potential consumers of the goods produced and distributed. Right? So what all the firm strives? They seeks to achieve the buyer's patronage. For what purpose? For pursuing the business objectives. Right? So this is how competition is usually and universally accepted. World Bank has put in these terms the concept of competition. Now, some more analysis regarding competition. Now, why there should be competition? In order to understand, let us correlate competition with various factors, and one is the efficiency in general and economic efficiency in particular. The term efficiency implies good input output relationship. Less cost, more value, more output. Right? So efficiency is in terms of the relationship between input and output. Input involves the costs. So for a manufacturer, there are costs involved in the value addition to the basic material, that is the raw materials, in order to create a valued product. Taking example of car manufacturing companies, so they acquire raw materials like steel, paint, many plastic and fiber products, many glass products, say glass shields, many spares which are used in the engine, and so on. And the goods, the raw materials are assembled together utilizing the marvelous engineering technology to produce it into a comfortable car in which we can commute. Right? So value addition over the raw material to make it into a car which we intends to purchase for us. Right? Now, number of cost involved in the endeavor. Right? We say competition brings efficiency, that is the economic efficiency. In order to be efficient, the product must involve lesser cost. Right? With the less cost, it will be less priced. Right? When there are market players competing with each other, the prime concern in mind become less price with improved quality, and thus, needless to say, there is cost pressure. To cut the cost becomes an implied pressure in the minds of the market players, and this happens with competition. Right? So economic efficiency, wasteful expenditures, are cut. Right? This will result into lesser cost of production. Lesser cost of production will result into the less market price of the product, and thus the benefit of efficiency will be transferred in favor of the consumers. right? Hence, the benefit of competition results into consumer welfare through less cost resulting into less price, right? We talk about competition, which is not only at the domestic level but also operates at the global level because of the globalized nature of economy. International trade or world trade occurs due to principle of comparative advantage. Which is regulated by World Trade Organization, a multilateral financial institution. Where is the need to carry out international trade? And why there should be dependence? Why international trade? And dependence on suppliers situated in other country, foreign countries, that is the exporter. Initially, post-independence, 50s, 1950s, India's economic policy had been import substitution and indigenous production. So, Government of India adopted the approach to produce every goods which is required to be consumed by the industry or by the consumers indigenously. And no import or less import. The nascent Indian economy did not want it. Dependence upon the market players located in foreign countries. This was primarily due to the British hangover, because East India Company from United Kingdom came to Indian subcontinent in around early 17th century, and the merchant and traders became the rulers finally, and they continued to rule till India got independence in 1947. So initially, India's official policy was to produce everything domestically. However, there was a paradigm shift in 1991 with the adoption of new economic policy. So we could continue with the initial policy for only 40 years in around 1950 till around 1990. 1991 was a paradigm shift, change of economic policy instance by Government of India with the adoption of new economic policy, implementing liberalization, privatization and globalization. So the present era is maximization of globalization. So globalized economy operates on the principle of comparative advantage, which provides that the occupation or the engagements should be based on a specialized approach rather than adopting an approach to do everything, adopt an approach to do one thing in which one is specialized. So where the core competence lies, that shall be the engagement, the occupation, the business, the trade, the profession, the governance, not everything, right? Why? Because there is a need, greater dominance of efficiency. More research should be carried out, more understanding of the product will lead to improved quality. So in the present era of globalized economies, the market economy concept, which means the principle of demand and supply shall determine what is to be produced, in what quantity and at what price. So market economy concept, which is the overwhelming idea in the world economies. Marketplace, which can be real or virtual, shall determine what is to be produced, in what quantity and at what price. So the trade-off between demand and supply will result into the actual market behavior. So consumers will demand and producers and distributors will supply. So let the interaction be. However, the question arises that the interaction should be what is called fair and genuine. Interaction should be which means that the comparison or competition should be based on the criteria of the fairness, the competition would be not fair, would be unfair, and therefore the competitive outcomes would be unsustainable. So only that competition is sustainable which is based on the idea or principle of fairness. Should be clear. So in a globalized economy, full benefit of competition will result into the cross-border investment, cross-border economic transactions, that is imports and exports, right? The open international trade, open international investment, which will be possible through the competition at the global level. Competition leads to balance between socio-economic power. How? And what is that? Competition, fair competition, renders opportunities in the market. And therefore, new entrepreneurs are created in the society, and thereby socio-economic power balance is through competition, because competition is based on efficiency. Those who are efficient will grab the opportunity in the market and will emerge as entrepreneur. So society will have economic equality, thereby social equality. Economic equality leads to social balance, and it is the resultant of the competition in the economic system, right? Competition leads to transparency. And thus the relationship between government and business government business relationship is not opaque and thus tendency of corruptions, lobbying are curtailed because of the transparency in the relationships, right? So we understood the good effect of competition, provided the competition is fair and genuine. Competition can be based on unfairness. The market players may adopt unfair means to compete. Right? In fact, it is not competition because it is artificial competition and therefore unsustainable. Now, historical background of competition regime in India. So, prior to Competition Act 2002, it was Monopolistic and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, which was repealed and Competition Act 2002 was passed by Parliament. Important question in mind will be, looking at the economic scenario, So MRTP Act passed in 1969. So what was before? What about competition regime before 1969? During the era of MRTP Act, which means the year in which it was passed, and it was made applicable from 1st of June 1970. So you can say the era of MRTP Act nearly 30 years, and the era of Competition Act 2002, which is from 2002 onwards till present. This historical economic scenario is to be considered in order to understand the competition regime in India. During the MRTP era, can be divided into two, that is 1970 to 1991 and 1991 till 2002, because in 1991 new economic policy that implemented liberalization, privatization and globalization was adopted. So there have been paradigm shift with the adoption of new economic policy. Right? Now, before 1969, Indian economy was a nascent economy. Before. Right? India became free from colonial power and was industrially backward. India inherited an economy in ravaged position because of the loot and plunder by Britishers all along the British rule. So on the eve of independence in 1947, since we started operating politically, economically, independently, India was a poor economy. So the initial instance of government was to take the economic forward. So the vision of the government under the leadership of the Prime Minister and other intellectuals was to make India a developed country and advanced country, and during 50s, the year 1950s, the way to become forward and advanced was industrial development, because service sector was not prominent. So what policy instance was adopted? In the economic policies of India, it was adoption of the policy to lead, that can lead industrial development. So heavy industries, capital goods industries were established in India, and that also primarily under the ownership and control of government of India, because private sector was not conspicuous. Private sector lacked investment power. So it was the government which has to come forward to achieve the vision of industrial development at an accelerated rate. Right? So during 50s, the concept of competition was less visible in the economy, right? Since private sector started operating, and therefore the government has noticed the trend of gulf gap between the haves and haves not. Therefore, in 1964, a commission was established by central government named Monopolies Inquiry Commission, under the chairpersonship of a Supreme Court judge, Justice Das Gupta, a Supreme Court judge, and the terms of reference to the commission was to inquire into the nature and the causes of the extent of what is called concentration of economic power. the nature, causes and extent of concentration of economic power in the country, and to suggest remedies how to deconcentrate or decentralize the economic power. To understand the terminology, we must visit the Constitution of India. Constitution of India has a part called Directive Principles of State Policies. In the Constitution, there is a part, Directive Principles of State Policy, and within this part, there are Article 38 as well as Article 39. Provisions contained in Article 38 states that the state includes the entire mechanism that gives governance to people, that is the legislature, executive, the judiciary. So all the three organs collectively constitute state, which is engaged in providing governance to the people. Article 38 requires the state, that is the governance system, state, what it should do? It should strive to minimize what? The inequalities in income. The state shall strive to minimize the inequalities in income distribution. Article 39 states that Article 39 gives direction, because the name is directive principle. So this part of constitution gives direction to state, and these directions are expected to be followed by the state in making its policies. That's how the entire terminology is. This part gives direction to state, and these directions are contained in the form of principles which are to be adopted by the state in making its policies, including economic policies. So Article 39 requires the state that the policy should secure the ownership and control over material resources such that it shall subserve the common good. Common means people. And the operation of the economic system, just now we talked, economic system is production, distribution, consumption. The whole process in economics is called economic system. So the economic system should operate in a manner that it leads to common good, and is not what is called detrimental to common good. It must serve public good, common good, not detrimental to common good. So, economic system should serve the common good and should not be detrimental to common good. Now come to the terms of reference of the Commission. Concentration of economic power. Inquire into that. Find out the causes which is leading to this. And find out the extent of concentration of economic power. What is the level of concentration of economic power? So what is the concentration of economic power? Material resources, physical resources, economic resources, financial resources are controlled by few, selected few, and masses, people are at the mercy of the selected few. So haves few, have-nots masses. Right? So important article contained in Constitution, Article 38 and 39. This articles mandates the state to adopt economic policies such that does not lead to concentration of economic power and that leads to service of common good. That secures an economic system where equality is promoted. Equality is promoted and inequalities ends. Progressive end to inequality and progressive realization of equality. And one of the equality mandated in the Constitution is economic equality. So economic, political and social equality. Political equality, one person, one vote, one value. So irrespective of the voter being the billionaire, citizen of the country, or a laborer, landless laborer, all are equal politically. Right? Social equality is based on the artificial social hierarchies. And then the economic inequalities which the state can play conducive role to bridge the gulf rather than engulfing the gap, bridge the gap through the economic policies whereby there is opportunity and deconcentration of economic power, new entrepreneurs in the economy. Right? So this was the scenario in 1960s. However, you must note the conditions of economy, political conditions. 1960s was, at least first half of 1960s was full of problems. 1962 Chinese aggression, 1965 Indo-Pak war, right? So Indian economy was under a pressure to sustain because of huge defense expenditures. And 1960s, particularly second half of 1960s, when Indira Gandhi became premier, it was pro-nationalization policies adopted by Government of India. So after Lal Bahadur Shastri died in 1966, Indira Gandhi joined as Prime Minister of India and pro-nationalization move was promoted. Official instance of economic policy was pro-nationalization. So financial institutions began to be nationalized. So 1969, several banks were nationalized. Insurance companies were nationalized. Industrial institutions, organizations, say mines, coal mines, nationalized. So you must correlate the scenario prevailing during that time. Right? So Government of India established the commission, gave the task to the commission to find out the level of concentration of economic power in Indian economy, because pro-nationalization instance was the reality of the time. Right. So this commission, Monopolies Inquiry Commission, it came out with its recommendations, and as part of its recommendation, it has drafted MRTP bill which was passed by Parliament in 1969 and was enforced with effect from 1st June 1970. Why it took so many years? Commission established 64, bill passed 1969 because of so many other problems associated with the government, right? And finally, the bill became MRTP Act 1969, right? Government of India passed it in the Parliament and adopted the law in practice. This act, MRTP Act, had the objectives. So the principal objectives of the act was, what is the principal objective? Was to have comprehensive control over the undertakings. The private sector business organizations called undertakings as per the law was brought under comprehensive control and regulation of the government under the law, MRTP Act. right? So this undertakings, the group, the conglomerate, Tata Group, Reliance Group, as well as the interconnected undertakings, all were to be strictly controlled and regulated. And this comprehensive control was established through 4 specific objectives, which were: as already noted, prevention of concentration of economic power to common detriment. These were the objectives spelled out in the Act: to control monopolies. Monopoly means single market player in an industry. So needless to say, monopoly leads to arbitrariness in decision making, and therefore there can be manipulations, particularly price manipulation, to the detriment of consumers, of the economy, and hence public interest. So monopolies are the dangerous market situation. Then the objective is, here is a word monopoly, monopolistic. So the Act dealt with prohibition, complete ban, prohibition of monopolistic trade practices. Then the Act has the word, in the name of the Act, the word restrictive. So prohibition of restrictive trade practices. So just to enumerate, the overall objective of MRTP Act 1969 was to exercise comprehensive control, strict control over the industries, private sector industries, undertakings, the group, the interconnected undertakings, through prevention of concentration of economic power, prevention of monopolies, prohibition of monopolistic trade practices, and prohibition of restrictive trade practices. Now the first, prevention of undesirable concentration of economic power was achieved through the provisions under MRTP Act related to dominant undertaking. An undertaking which has sizable proportion of market share market share means in terms of turnover of the product, the goods or the services. So an undertaking was considered to be dominant when it has sizable proportion of market share, or it had sizable proportion of the production capacity or installed capacity. For example, sizable market share, 60% market share in the sales of the product. More than that, 90% market share. More than that. Taking example, Google is an internet search engine market, dominant enterprise, sizable market share. Microsoft Windows, sizable market share, sizable production, right? So a dominant undertaking was defined in these terms. MRTP Act provided that a dominant undertaking, it was referred to as dominant undertaking, referred to as MRTP undertaking. It was named as MRTP undertaking. So a dominant undertaking under the MRTP Act was required to obtain many approvals from government. Many prior approvals were required under the Act from the government, from the central government. For what purpose? Whenever they want to have substantial expansion of production, so they already have sizable production capacity. So if in entire economy there is 100 units of production, they are producing 90 units out of 100. So if they want to increase it beyond 90, as per the MRTP Act, the dominant undertaking was required to obtain prior approval of central government. So what? If you want to increase production capacity, the word was substantial increase, and that was defined. Right? If the dominant undertaking wanted to carry out amalgamation or merger, or it wanted to take over any other undertaking operating in the industry, producing the same or similar goods. So any substantial expansion in terms of amalgamation, merger, takeover was required prior approval of the government. So first produce the proposal regarding merger amalgamation before the government, get the approval from government, green signal, then execute the proposal. Right? Any appointment of director, appointment of directors in such undertaking needed government approval. So, if a person is director in a dominant undertaking and the same person, director of dominant undertaking, is to be appointed as director of any other undertaking, it needed central government prior approval. Right? So, the act empowered the government to exercise control over dominant undertaking in various manners. In addition, under the provision of the Act dealing with prevention of concentration of economic power, the central government can order what is called division of undertaking. Division of undertaking. It is a big undertaking, dominant undertaking, division. Right? And thereby the dominance would come down. The central government could also order what is called severance of interconnection between the interconnected undertakings. And that's how the government's control over the undertakings could be exercised. Right? So, in addition, so control of monopolies and control over concentration of economic power through the mechanism of dominant undertaking. Right? Besides, Besides, MRTP Act dealt with monopolistic trade practices, which were defined as trade practice. The word trade is a broader term in terms of MRTP Act. It includes production, distribution both, right? Trade practice does not mean only sell and only sell by the distributor, dealer, wholesaler, retailer, shopkeeper. It includes production, manufacturing. So monopolistic trade practice was defined as a trade practice in terms of few unreasonableness, a trade practice in terms of unreasonableness in price charged for the product. Unreasonableness in increasing the profits or increasing the sales of the product, right? Unreasonableness in lessening competition and unreasonableness in limiting the technical development so an organization can charge unreasonable price only when it has position in the market which is either a monopoly or a near monopoly, because the consumers would not agree to buy at an unreasonable price if there are substitute commodities available at a below price. So the position of the enterprise is that of a monopoly or monopolistic, right? So unreasonableness in these terms. So under MRTP Act, monopolistic trade practices were prohibited. Any indulgence found after inquiry by a body in the act called MRTP Commission could lead to passing cease and desist order, that is not to continue with the monopolistic trade practice, as well as imposition of severe penalties on the undertaking by the government. So wherever there is allegation of monopolistic trade practice under the MRTP Act, the procedure was to carry out an inquiry and an investigation by MRTP Commission. The Commission could suggest measures, the inquiry report, based on the inquiry report, the central government could pass several orders to undo the mischief caused by the monopolistic trade practice. Right? So, it was about monopolistic trade practice on the part of the undertaking. Now, monopolistic trade practice could be engaged into by a single player singly, or a few players acting in concert, acting in some arrangement or some agreement. Leading to loss to common mass people, leading to detriment to common people. Because if prices are more in the economy of any product, who is losing? It is the final or the end consumer. Public interest will be disturbed. And therefore, the government under the Act was empowered to pass orders to undo the mischief, to take correct and remedial measures. So, this we have understood. Thank you very much.